Senate of the United States, a resolution to establish a select committee of the Senate to conduct an investigation and study of the extent, if any, to which illegal, improper, or unethical activities were engaged in by any persons acting individually or in combination with others in the presidential election of 1972, or any campaign, canvass, or other activity related to it.
On April 6th, I was called to Mr. Bartlome's office.
Who is Mr. Bartlome?
He is secretary of the corporation.
Please continue.
And informed by him that I had a bonus of $5,000 and that I was to make out a check for $3,000 to a committee to re-elect the president.
Impact brings you Washington, November 13th. Tonight, unabridged videotape coverage of today's hearings by the Senate Select Committee on Presidential Campaign Activities. Here is Impact correspondent Jim Lehrer.
Good evening. The Senate Watergate Committee heard fascinating testimony today on how a major corporation, the American Shipbuilding Company, raised money for President Nixon's 1972 re-election campaign. Two executives of the Ohio firm detailed the elaborate scheme which involved the awarding of phony bonuses to employees who then automatically contributed the money to Nixon campaign committees. The two witnesses also admitted they participated in an initial company effort to conceal the illegal program from the FBI. The committee only met for 2 hours today before recessing to hear from more corporate witnesses tomorrow and Thursday. Prior to the hearings, the committee got together in private to vote still another step in their move to take testimony from President Nixon. Peter Kay has a report on that. Peter?
The committee met in executive session and voted 5-1 to seek its own audience with President Nixon. The lone dissenter was Florida's Edward Gurney, who said he would join other Senate Republicans in meeting with the president. But the other two Republicans on the committee, Lowell Weicker and Howard Baker, said they would meet with the president only as members of the Watergate Committee. And Weicker added that the committee believes a record of its conversation with the president should be made public. Today we heard what Jim has very aptly described as fascinating testimony about campaign fundraising. Now, how typical is this testimony, and what can be done to prevent future abuses? A man who had many of the answers was the late Eugene Wyman, one of the Democratic Party's most successful fundraisers. Before his untimely death a few months ago, Mr. Wyman raised millions of dollars for President Johnson, former Vice President Hubert Humphrey, and former California Governor Pat Brown. About 14 months ago, I interviewed Mr. Wyman in his Beverly Hills law office. The interview was filmed just as the Watergate story exploded, and it never has been shown before. But in view of Mr. Wyman's rather prophetic observations and the nature of today's testimony, I believe it is particularly appropriate at this time.
If a business feels that a particular candidate is more favorable to that business, or if that business feels that there is an initiative on the ballot or a proposition that's going to increase its taxes, of course it is expected to work against that. But I do want to emphasize that in the years and years and years that I have raised money, that there have only been few occasions and rare occasions where there has been any quid pro quo where a person has said, I will give you X number of dollars and I want this. It really doesn't happen.
What happens when a person says that? Do you turn them down?
Yes. Yes, because I think that's what's called dangerous money. I think a fundraiser has to be very careful of the kind of money that he takes and from whom he takes. The candidate must have a great deal of confidence in his fundraiser. And he won't have that confidence unless he knows that the fundraiser has judgment. And you're not using judgment if you take money where there are conditions attached. And good fundraisers don't.
Yes, but don't fundraisers themselves or big contributors have a bigger voice at court? For instance, wouldn't a Gene Wyman have a greater influence on a candidate than some other successful Beverly Hills attorney?
Well, I appreciate the compliment. I'm really not sure from experience whether how much it is heated. I don't think it should be heated at all. I do agree, if you're asking a broad question, that the system is bad. And I would love to be put out of business, and that is to eliminate the whole fundraising situation. It is bad. First of all, it's bad for the candidate. It's embarrassing. Here you have people running for the presidency of the United States, the Senate, that have to ask for money, to be brought into a room and explain why they should receive money. I don't like that. I think that it's humiliating, and I don't like being a part of it, except somebody has to do it. The system is based upon that. And until we have a tax write-off system where each party will get so many millions of dollars and each person can get credit for $1 off of their taxes, you're going to have this. Now, someday there's going to have to be reform because it's costing more and more and more to run these campaigns. It's getting out of control, so something has to be done.
Peter will be back at the close of tonight's broadcast to discuss the raising of campaign funds with Mike McLister, a Washington-based political consultant, but that's for later. Right now, let's go to a rundown of how the 2 hours unfolded today. In the first hour, American shipbuilding executive Matthew Clark tells how he was given a $5,000 company bonus with the understanding that it must be contributed to the Nixon campaign. He then made false statements, one to the FBI, to conceal the illegal transaction. Clark said he did all of this at the request of his superiors at the American Shipbuilding Company. In the second hour, Robert Bartlome, the company's man in charge of the fundraising project, says 7 other employees of the company also did the same thing. The total was $40,000, $26,200 of corporation funds after taxes, which went to the re-election campaign. Bartlome said he implemented the illegal procedure on direction of the company's chief executive officer, George Steinbrenner, and sent the money to Herbert Kalmbach at Committee to Re-elect headquarters in Washington. Bartlome said his firm also has used false expense voucher systems to raise political money. Now to the hearings and the call to order by Vice Chairman Senator Howard Baker.
The committee will come to order. The chairman is necessarily absent attending another committee meeting this morning and will return later in the day. I must leave the hearings very shortly to attend the meeting of the Commerce Committee in conjunction with the Northeast Railroad legislation and other matters. Senator Inouye will preside in the absence of the chairman and the vice chairman. Council will call the first witness.
Mr. Matthew E. Clark, Jr. The witness is here. Will you stand to take the oath?
Would you hold up your right hand, please? You solemnly swear that the testimony you're about to give before this committee will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God. I do. You may be seated, sir.
Mr. Clark, I see that you are accompanied by counsel. Will counsel please identify himself for the record?
Leonard C. Greenbaum, Washington, D.C.
Mr. Clark, do you have any preliminary statement which you wish to read or give to the committee?
No, I do not.
What is your present position, Mr. Clark?
I am Director of Purchasing with the American Shipbuilding Company.
Where are you located? Where's your place of business?
Our corporate office is in Cleveland, Ohio, and our AmShip division, which I am affiliated with, is in Lorain, Ohio.
Could you just briefly describe the nature of this corporation, what the corporation engages in as a matter of business?
It's a major shipbuilding and ship repair corporation.
And does it operate in various parts of the country?
Yes, there's various divisions, Nashville, Tennessee, Cincinnati, Ohio.
Do you have any, of your own knowledge, could you just give us any ideas to the number of employees that the corporation has? If there's another witness to that, we could ask them that.
Yes, I think.
How long have you personally been with the company, Mr. Clark?
Since March of 1968.
And at that time, have you held this particular position during all this time?
No, my first position with the American Shipbuilding Company was that of an estimator, and then I moved on to chief expediter, and then to director of purchasing.
In your present position, could you briefly describe for the committee your duties?
In charge of the purchasing functions of our AmShip division for material for the boats as well as inventory materials.
What is your salary, Mr. Clark?
$16,300.
That's an annual salary.
Yes.
Now, as part of your compensation, did you, as a normal matter, receive bonuses from the company which you could keep for your own use?
No.
In 1972, during the presidential campaign, did you receive a bonus from the corporation?
Yes, I did.
What was the size of that bonus?
$5,000.
Would you please briefly give the committee the details of how you received the bonus, and in that, who informed you about it, and what will you expect to do with that bonus?
On April 6th, I was called to Mr. Bartlome's office.
Who is Mr. Bartlome?
He is secretary of the corporation.
Please continue.
And informed by him that I had a bonus of $5,000 and that I was to make out a check for $3,000 to a committee to re-elect the president.
Did he inform you as to who had informed him to tell you about this?
No, he did not.
Did you know, or have you learned, who set up the bonus plan?
I cannot say that.
You don't have anything of your own knowledge or even hearsay knowledge?
My contact was strictly with Mr.
Through Mr. Bartlome. Now, did you say you were to make one check to...
I beg your pardon, there was two checks, one for $3,000 and one for $100.
Now, do you know why you broke up the contribution for the committee to re-elect the president? $3,000 and $100, two separate checks?
No, I received a slip of paper from Mr. Bartlome stating the committee name and the amount to be made out.
Do you know, what date was this? Did you say April 6th?
April 6th.
Yeah. Were you told anything concerning whether or not that date, April 6th, was relevant? Why the contribution had to be made then?
Yes, the intent of writing the check on April 6th is because of the disclosure law going into effect on April 7th.
So that giving the contribution on April 6th would mean that it would not have to be disclosed?
Yes.
Now, would you look on, you've been provided by the committee staff with some exhibits and tabs. And tab 1, would you look at tab 1, and could you identify tab 1 for the committee?
That is my check voucher for the bonus in 1972.
And does it show that a payment of $5,000 and after deductions a net pay of $3,700?
Yes, it does.
Now, and it was from the $3,700 that you made the two checks, one a $3,000 check and one a $100 check, which is a political contribution.
Yes.
That would leave some money left over, because that would be $3,100 from $37, about $500 left over. What did you do with the other $500? Was this for your own use?
No, it was not. There was some cash donations that I cannot recall at this time the amounts or to whom.
Well, how? But they were. You say a cash donation. Did you deposit the original $3,700 in your own account?
Yes. Yes. One amount of the cash, I think it was an amount of $300, was a check written to cash and deposited through the American Shipbuilding Company petty cash.
And you understood that to be used for other political contributions that would be made in cash?
Mr. Bartlome always informed me of the amounts of money and to whom, and he kept the record of this. I did not.
Now, would you look at tab 2? And tab 2 appears to be a photocopy of two checks. One made out to Loyal Americans for Government Reform in the amount of $3,000 on your bank account, signed by you, dated April 6th, and the other, a check made out for Stable Society Council for $100 on your bank account, and signed by you for $100. So these are the two checks that you made out?
Yes, they are.
And you gave to Mr. Bartlome?
Yes, I did.
By the way, if you look on tab 3, there is a photocopy of a slip of paper that has the two committees on it. One, the Stable Society Council, $100, and the other, Loyal Americans for Government Reform, $3,000. What is that slip? How did
This
you do
is
that?
the slip of paper that Mr. Bartlome gave me in order for me to make out the correct amount and to the correct committee.
So that he really gave you that slip of paper to guide you and direct you as to which committees actually should receive the contributions.
Yes.
And did you know that those committees were committees of the Committee to Re-elect the President?
Yes.
Did you receive any personal receipt for this contribution?
No, I did not.
And you made the contribution from the bonus, which was, in fact, not a bonus for you, but a bonus to give back political contributions through these personal checks.
Yes.
And you gave that to Mr. Bartlome.
Yes.
Do you know whether or not he, in fact, gave those checks to the Committee to Re-elect the President?
I don't know personally if he did.
Did he ever report to you that he did? Did he ever tell you that he did?
Yes.
Now, without specifically indicating the nature of the political contributions, you've received similar bonuses at earlier times for political contributions from the company in the same procedure that you have just indicated in this 1972 bonus. Is that true?
That is true.
And that, again, these so-called bonuses were in fact not bonuses, but was money from the corporation being given to you in the form of a bonus, which you understood you had to pay back in the form of a contribution, a political contribution.
Yes.
And you, in fact, did that.
Yes.
Were you aware, and I think you've answered the question, that you were not aware as to who ultimately approved this bonus plan? You worked with Mr. Bartlome, you say?
Yes.
Did you know that it was illegal for a corporation to make a political contribution out of corporate funds?
Not at first, very truthfully, but I have since learned.
You've since learned. Now, in August of 1973, were you interviewed by the Federal Bureau of Investigation, or by agents of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, concerning your contribution to the re-election of the President?
I was.
Prior to this interview, Mr. Clark, did you have a conversation with Mr. Steinbrenner, the president of the corporation?
Yes, I did.
Could you briefly tell us what that meeting or conversation was about?
Mr. Steinbrenner mentioned that the FBI would be interviewing us about our contributions, and that Mr. Melcher, our corporation lawyer, would be talking to us about it further.
Did he suggest that you meet with Mr. Melcher?
Evidently, it was already pre-planned that Mr. Melcher would contact me.
And did he contact you?
Yes, he did.
By the way, did Mr. Steinbrenner say anything further to you about that?
Just not to be concerned with it was routine.
That this was a routine investigation that you shouldn't be concerned about?
Yes.
Now, you did meet with Mr. Melcher. When did you meet with Mr. Melcher? How much before, how much prior to the meeting with the FBI agents?
I believe it was 3 or 4 days prior to my meeting with the FBI agents. I believe there was a weekend in between.
I know. What, if anything, did Mr. Melcher tell you?
He told me that we would be questioned by the FBI, and to tell them that my wife and I had decided on our own to donate the money to re-elect the president. I mentioned to Mr. Melcher that I did not want to involve my wife and would not, but I would say that I had decided to do this. Mr. Melcher had in his possession previous statements by Mr. Bartlome and Mr. Lepkowski, and he asked me to...
Mr. Lepkowski, an employee who also received a bonus for the purpose of making a political contribution?
That's what I understand, yes.
Right. And therefore he had in his possession statements from Mr. Bartlome and Mr. Lepkowski, these statements that were given to the FBI?
Yes.
They had already been interviewed by the FBI?
Yes.
And you say Mr. Melcher had these in his possession?
Yes.
Did he show them to you?
Just by holding them up in front of me and saying, I have here the reports by Mr. Melcher, or Mr. Lepkowski, Mr. Bartlome, and I want you, after we're through here, to get down and take a look at them to get an idea of what they said.
And what impression did you get from that recommendation?
Well, the impression I got that we were, he had mentioned that we should say that we gave the donation because of President Nixon's involvement in the shipping industry and helped the shipping industry, and to get an idea in what vein the other fellows had made this similar statement.
In other words, would it be fair to say that what he was suggesting to you was that your stories be the same, or approximately the same, that you were giving a voluntary contribution out of your own funds, and that it was for President Nixon's reelection because of what he's done for the shipping industry?
Yes.
Now, did you in fact go down and read Mr. Bartlome's and Mr. Lepkowski's statements?
I went down and contacted Mr. Bartlome. He did not have his report there. I then went and saw Mr. Lepkowski. He did have his report. I did read it in Mr. Lepkowski's presence and returned it to him.
Then were you interviewed by the FBI agents?
Yes.
And did you in fact give the kind of statement that Mr. Melcher and Mr. Bartlome and Mr. Lepkowski indicated that you should give it?
Similar, yes.
Now, if you look at tab 5, there is what appears to be a handwritten copy of your statement. Is this would you look at it and could you identify it?
Yes.
As the statement which you gave or which was you gave and then was put down in this form to the FBI agents?
Yes, it is.
Do you want to read the statement for the committee?
I, Matthew Edward Clark, Jr., make this free and voluntary statement to Ambrose P. Burke, Jr. and Michael T. Bartley, who have identified themselves to me as special agents of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Agent Burke furnished me with an interrogation advice of rights from which I read, understood the meaning of, and executed the waiver section of this form. I have been employed by the American Shipbuilding Company since March of '68. I am presently the Director of Purchasing and previously held positions of Chief Expediter and Estimator. My salary in March of 1968, when I began employment with this company, was $8,600. My present salary as of August 1973 is $16,300. In connection with bonuses received from the American Shipbuilding Company, I received none in 1968 and may have received one in both 69 and 70, but I am not sure of this. In the years 71 and 72, I recall receiving a bonus of about $5,000 each year. This bonus would be paid by regular payroll check, and it would be less deductions for taxes, etc. I cannot recall the exact net amount of these bonuses. In connection with the stock option at the American Shipbuilding Company, I have two options to purchase 500 shares of stock each, one option being in the range of $21 per share and the other option at about $22 per share. These options will expire in 1975 or 76, and to date I have not purchased any of the stock. During the early part of 1972, the exact period of time unrecalled, I discussed the presidential campaign with many of my fellow employees. I felt that I wanted to contribute in some way to the re-election of President Nixon, as I felt the shipping industry was profiting more since the passage of the Maritime Act of 1970. I also feel that I had hoped indirectly to bring to the attention of Mr. George Steinbrenner, Chairman and Chief Executive Officer of the American Shipbuilding Company, that I was personally interested in the future of shipbuilding industry by backing the Nixon administration, which administration helped the industry. In particular, I recall speaking more to Mr. Robert Bartlome about making a contribution to assist in the re-election of President Nixon. In that, I inquired of Mr. Bartlome how I would go about making a contribution. Mr. Bartlome said he would get a list of the organizations connected with Nixon's re-election campaign, and that I could choose one of these organizations to contribute to. I chose one of these organizations from a list provided me by Mr. Bartlome. However, I cannot recall the name of the organization or the committee, but I do recall it had the word society in it. I also learned sometime around February 1972 from Mr. Bartlome that I would be receiving a bonus, but I did not know the amount of the bonus or when I would receive it. In April of 1972, I wrote a check in the amount of $3,000 on my Cleveland Trust checking account payable to the committee mentioned above. I gave this check to Mr. Bartlome with the implied understanding that he would see the check arrived at its proper destination. Also, in either late 1971 or early 1972, I purchased 2 tickets to a political dinner to be held in Washington, D.C.
By the way, on this phase of your statement, this has nothing to do with the presidential campaign of '72. Is that true?
Yes.
Right. So that actually, you've now arrived at the point of your statement where you said in April of '72 you wrote a check in the amount of $3,000, and that was to the committee of the committee to re-elect the president.
Yes.
Right. Now, the balance of your statement, which will go into the record,
Could you repeat your last question?
You began to get into a paragraph of your statement to the FBI dealing with tickets to a political dinner or something. The question I asked was whether or not that part of your statement had anything to do with the presidential campaign in 1972.
I really can't say. I really don't know.
Well, if you don't know, then you can read that paragraph. It may have. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
He just doesn't know.
I just don't know.
Well, in any event, without having to go through the entire statement, there were other contributions your statement indicates that you made based on bonus received by the company.
Yes.
This statement, although not in total, but in those parts dealing with your desire to make a contribution to the committee to re-elect the president and for the purpose of supporting the president for his position in the shipbuilding industry and the fact that this was your own voluntary contribution, this was a false statement that you were making to the FBI.
Yes.
Now, did you later sign a statement claiming that the bonus was not connected to any political contribution, but was actually a bona fide bonus given you for your work or in the corporation?
Yes. I believe it was around April of 1972. Or, I beg your pardon.
Actually, it's earlier rather than later you signed that statement. What was...
well, let me correct that. It's 1973, April 1973, is when I received the certificate from Mr. Bartlome.
Could you briefly tell the committee how that came about? You say you received a certificate from Mr. Bartlome.
Yes. Mr. Bartlome called me to his office and said that I would like you to sign this. And I read it, and I said something to him to the extent, you've got to be kidding. And he said, no, I'd like you to sign it.
All right, now, when you look at tab 4, and you identify the certificate under the heading American Shipbuilding Company as the certificate that Mr. Bartlome gave you and asked you to sign?
Yes.
Let me just read that very brief certificate. The undersigned acknowledges that in the year 1972, he received a bonus for services rendered to the company in the amount of $5,000. The undersigned does hereby certify that the receipt of such bonus was in no manner either directly or indirectly conditioned upon or subject to the making by him of any contribution, whether charitable, political, or otherwise. The undersigned does hereby further certify that at no time during the year 1972 has any director, officer, or supervisory employee of the company, or any of its subsidiaries or affiliates, directly or indirectly directed, requested, or suggested that I make contributions to any charitable or religious group or organization or any political organization or candidate, and that any contribution so made by me during the year 1972 was entirely voluntary and of my own choosing. Now, you said this, when you saw that language, is this the language you said you've got to be kidding, Mr. Bartlome?
Yes.
But nevertheless, he asked you to sign it, you did sign it?
Yes.
And you knew this was a false statement?
Yes.
And by the way, the date of that, it is December 30, 1972. Is that the date you actually signed that statement?
It was signed in April of '73, and Mr. Bartlome asked me to backdate it.
So this was backdated for the purpose of giving some legitimacy to that bonus and the contribution. Now, were you subpoenaed to appear before the special grand jury sitting in Washington, D.C.?
Yes, I was.
And when were you subpoenaed to appear?
I was subpoenaed on Friday, August 31st.
And on what date were you to appear? Do you recall the date that your appearance was called for?
At that time, it was September 5th.
Now, what did you do, Mr. Clark, when you received the subpoena?
Immediately upon receiving the subpoena, I went to the phone and called Mr. Steinbrenner. Mr. Steinbrenner was not at home, and I left word for him to call me back. My next thought was to call Mr. Melcher. I didn't have his home phone number, so I called Mr. Bartlome. I told Mr. Bartlome that I had been subpoenaed and I'd like to have Melcher's phone number. He gave it to me, and I called Mr. Melcher and told him that I had been subpoenaed.
And what did Mr. Melcher tell you?
He was surprised that I think that I had been subpoenaed, and he told me not to worry about it, that if it came that we had to go, he would definitely go with me.
Now, on September 3, 1973, did you and Mr. Bartlome meet with Mr. Steinbrenner?
Yes, that was Labor Day, and Mr. Bartlome called me in the morning and said that Mr. Steinbrenner wanted to see me.
And who else was present at that meeting?
Present at that meeting was Mr. Bartlome, Mr. Lepkowski, myself, and Mr. Steinbrenner.
What were you told by Mr. Steinbrenner at that meeting?
Basically, we were told that Mr. Steinbrenner would do everything in his power so he wouldn't have to go. That we should not worry about it and be calm about it, and it was a very short meeting.
Did you say anything to Mr. Steinbrenner?
Later on, Mr. Bartlome, we all left that particular office.
Well, prior to your leaving, did you recall saying to Mr. Steinbrenner at that time that you would not perjure yourself before the grand jury?
Well, this is what I was driving at. Mr. Bartlome, we all left that office and went into another office. Mr. Lepkowski and I did. Later, Mr. Steinbrenner followed in, and at that time, Mr. Lepkowski and I both told Mr. Steinbrenner that we would not perjure ourselves, that we would tell the truth to the grand jury. In fact, Mr. Lepkowski had his FBI statement present and said that he couldn't abide with everything that was in that statement.
Now, prior to the September 5 scheduled grand jury appearance, what occurred? Did you have to appear before the grand jury personally on September 5?
No, on September 4, we knew that Mr. Melcher was in Washington trying to delay our appearance, and we were expecting a phone call from him one way or another. We then got the understanding about 5:30 that night that he had not been successful in postponement, and we all were prepared then to go to Washington the next morning. About 10:45 that night, Mr. Robert Dibble of our corporation called me and in essence told me that 4 people were going and 4 people weren't going the next day. And I was one of the ones that was not going. Mr. Bartlome was not going. Mr. Kissel was not going.
Now, at this time, were you continuously being assured that you shouldn't worry, that you would not be called before the grand jury?
Well, at this time and at the meeting on September 3rd, I had told Mr. Steinbrenner that I had this piece of paper that said I ought to be there, and I sure would like a piece of paper saying that I don't have to be there.
You didn't get such a piece of paper, did you?
No.
Now, what was the grand jury appearance, the September 5 appearance for anybody? Postponed?
Yes, 4 of the fellows did go down, and our appearance before the grand jury was postponed to the 18th.
18th of September?
Yes.
Now, did you and others meet with Mr. Steinbrenner the day after the 5th, on Thursday, September 6th?
Yes.
Could you tell us who were at that meeting?
On September 6th, around a little after lunchtime, the following met with Mr. Steinbrenner: Mr. Dibble, Mr. Bartlome, Mr. Lepkowski, Mr. Walker, Mr. Stafford, and myself.
And by the way, were those, like you, employees who had received bonuses and made political contributions out of them?
Yes.
All right. Now, what was the purpose of the meeting, and could you briefly tell us what was discussed at the meeting?
Yes, Mr. Steinbrenner evidently called the meeting to announce to us that Mr. Williams, an attorney in Washington.
Is that Edward Bennett Williams?
Yes. And Mr. Lawless were going to be in on the case now, and that Mr. Williams' group would help coordinate the activity of our appearance. During that meeting, it got to be kind of lighthearted because we were now postponed, and it was some relief that we didn't have to go. Mr. Steinbrenner mentioned that he had wanted to go before the grand jury or before the committee, the prosecuting committee, then the Cox committee, as did previous companies such as American and Braniff, I think are the names he mentioned, and he wanted to do that, but he was advised not to. We also, I mentioned to Mr. Steinbrenner, again, as others did, that if we had to go, we would tell the truth, and we felt sorry for that because we had to go back directly to Mr. Bartlome. And it came about in some confusing words that Mr. Steinbrenner thought that we thought that he did not have concern for us. And there were some words between he and Mr. Lepkowski about this. At that time, we said, I think Mr. Steinbrenner said, don't worry about it. And I said, I wish you'd stop using that statement.
Were you worrying about it, by the way?
Yes, we were very worried about it, and we were getting a little upset about it now because we couldn't see any particular path that we were following. I had mentioned to him that before Mr. Melcher told me not to worry about the FBI report, and Mr. Melcher told me not to worry when I got subpoenaed, and he told me not to worry because I didn't have to answer a grand jury subpoena, and he told me not to worry about having to go down at all, and I said, all I can see is me standing with my face behind bars and Mr. Melcher telling me not to worry about it. And at that time, we all laughed about it, and the phone rang, and it was Mr. Melcher. And George turned to me with his hand cupped over the phone and said, Matt, it's your friend. And I said, well, tell him not to worry about anything.
Well, now, the next day, on September the 7th, you saw Mr. Steinbrenner again. And did he offer you, or did he ask you to take any time off?
Well, during that meeting, at the tail end of that meeting, it was getting in the newspapers quite readily now about us and being named and so forth and so on. And we were concerned, most of us, about our families and our our children. And so I said to Mr. Steinbrenner, he said to all of us, he said, why don't you all take an extended weekend and go away for the weekend? This would have been Friday. And some of us discussed it, and then finally I decided to myself, yes, I would go. And I said, well, I'm going down to get some expense money, and Mr. Steinbrenner said, no, don't do that.
You'd be getting expense money from the corporation money. What did he say to you?
He said, don't do that, and he had gotten some money, and he said, here, take.
How much did he give you?
$200.
Did you learn that any other employee?
Well, this was in the presence of Mr. Walker, and he also offered it to Mr. Walker. In the beginning, Mr. Walker refused to take the money, but then as we further discussed and just general discussion, he did take the money.
Did Mr. Lepkowski receive $200 too?
Mr. Lepkowski told me that he was offered the money but did not take it because he didn't plan on going anywhere that weekend.
Well, did you expect, or did he offer that money in the form of a loan to you?
It's difficult to say. I had just paid all my bills, and I was going to go away for the weekend, and I didn't have any cash to do it. So I decided to get down and get expense money to cover the expenses, and he said, no, take this.
All right, so when he gave it to you, did you make up your own mind, at least at that time, that you were going to pay him back?
Somewhat, yes.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, did you actually have a letter instructing payroll to make payroll deductions to allow you to have that money paid back?
Yes, I did, but Mr. Steinbrenner had said, take this now and go and have a good weekend for your family because they've been through a lot and they shouldn't have to be through all this, so take them away. I know.
If you look at tab 6, yes, of the exhibits, and on the letterhead of the American Shipbuilding Company, a letter dated September 26, 1973, a letter to Mr. I take it Lepkowski.
Yes.
Dear Stan, please deduct $25 per paycheck for the next 8 pay periods for a total of $200. The $200 should be credited to the account of George M. Steinbrenner III with your name. Now, did you in fact go through or implement that payroll deduction plan?
No, I did not.
So that you didn't pay the money back, and I understand that you didn't because you thought that the money really was given to you because of the hardship that was provided for your family during this time.
I had found out subsequently that I had thought the other fellow had paid it back, and therefore I had proceeded to make out this form. I later found out that he did not pay it back, so I decided not to.
All right. Now, on September 11, 1973, did you and others meet with a lawyer recommended to you, a lawyer by the name of known as Judge Lawless?
Yes.
And who were at the meeting?
There was Mr. Melcher, Mr. McMahon, Clifford Roth, Ronald Slater, myself, Mr. Bartlome, Mr. Lepkowski, Mr. Walker, Mr. Kissel, Mr. Stafford.
And again, aside from Mr. Melcher, who was counsel for the corporation, the others were employees like yourself who had been given bonuses and had made political contributions from the bonuses.
No, there was our corporate counsel was there.
Mr. Melcher?
No, it was Mr. Roth.
Mr. Roth.
And also Mr. Slater was there, who I don't believe was in the same category.
By the way, did Judge Lawless, Mr. Lawless, indicate to you that he was acting as your lawyer during this meeting?
No, he did not. He said he was there only to advise us, and he was not acting as our counsel.
And what, in fact, did he advise you? What did he tell you?
Well, we had a general discussion. We then had found out about Statute 1001, which came as a great surprise to all of us.
How did you find out about that? This is Title 18 U.S. Code 1001, which generally deals with making false statements to a federal agency and as a felony under the federal penal code. How did that come to your attention?
As I got out the elevator at the corporate office, Mr. Stafford came up to me and said, I think we got a little problem here. I have been told earlier this morning by Judge Lawless that our statement we made to the FBI was to be considered under oath. And at that time or subsequently in the meeting, Judge Lawless got in to explain what he had meant by telling that to Mr. Stafford earlier in the morning.
Well, did you resolve the discussion at that meeting as to whether or not your statements were in violation of 18 U.S.C. 1001?
Not really.
Did this add to your concern, by the way?
Most certainly.
Did Mr. Lawless talk about anything else with you, give you any other advice? Did he evaluate your situation for you?
He went through and told us, I think it came up about immunity, and he explained to us the general procedures on getting immunity, and mentioned that perhaps our FBI statements were not complete, or we now recall a little more than what we had before. And at that time, I got my FBI report and said to him, no, Judge Lawless, I lied on this report, because now we were getting somewhat upset, I mean the 8 fellows, because there seemed to be no ends tied together, and we wanted people to understand that we were going to tell the truth. And I explained to him that my statement was not totally correct.
Did he suggest at that time that you should have your own counsel? Or have counsel representing you?
Yes.
Now, after this meeting, did you meet with Mr. Steinbrenner?
Yes, I returned to Lorraine, and Mr. Steinbrenner was there, and I talked with him, briefly mentioned to him that we had had a meeting with Mr. Lawless, and some more things came to light, that, and he had mentioned generalizations as the types of contributions and whatnot. And
I don't understand what you just said. You mentioned generalizations of the types of contributions.
Well, Judge Lawless was telling us in that meeting of the types that our contribution was kind of like a gray area, and that the people that had given cash were in a black area, and other people that had given other types of contributions were in a white area.
In other words, you were being advised as to the priorities of impropriety that were involved in various transactions, and that your activity was sort of a gray area activity. Is that it?
Yes.
And you're reporting this back to Mr. Steinbrenner?
Yes. All through this meeting with Judge Lawless, he did say, if we must appear before the grand jury, we are definitely, without doubt, to tell the truth and the whole truth.
Now, did you tell Mr. Steinbrenner at this meeting what you were going to do?
No, I don't believe so. I don't recall.
Did he ask you to do anything, what he wanted you to do?
No.
Did he tell you what he had wanted to do?
Oh, yes, he had mentioned that all along he wanted to go forward and talk to the committee, as did American and Braniff.
And what had prevented him from doing so?
He was advised by legal counsel not to.
All right, did you retain your own counsel?
It, in a roundabout way, was retained by Mr. Melcher.
Yes, and is this present counsel that is with you now?
Yes.
All right, and by the way, who was paying the fee of your counsel?
In a meeting we had at our attorney's office, Mr. Melcher mentioned that the corporation would take care of all the fees involved.
Now, was there any understanding on your part that on the basis of the corporation paying the fees, that your either testimony before the grand jury or before any other body would be affected by that?
No.
In other words, you were telling everybody that you were going to tell the truth as you knew it.
Yes.
Now, did the company, however, seek to obtain an indemnity agreement from you for the repayment of the fee should impropriety or illegality come out in your testimony?
Yes.
Did you agree to enter into such an indemnity agreement?
Immediately, I sent the agreement off to our attorneys who advised us not to sign it.
And you did not sign it?
That is correct.
Now, did you meet with the Special Prosecutor's Force staff?
Yes.
You know when you had that meeting?
Met with the Special Prosecutor staff on Monday evening, September 17th.
And at that time, did you agree to cooperate with the Special Prosecutor's Force and give testimony that would be truthful testimony concerning these events?
I did.
And were you offered immunity?
I was.
And did you in fact testify before the grand jury?
I did.
And when did you testify before the grand jury?
Tuesday, September 18th.
And is the testimony that you've given here today before the committee the testimony that you've given to the grand jury?
Yes.
I have no further questions, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, Richard Schultz, Assistant Minority Counsel, will question this witness.
Mr. Clark, you described for us the conversation when Mr. Bartlome first solicited a contribution and explained the bonus plan to you.
It is very vague because this conversation took place in 1970.
When in 1970, if you remember?
I do not recall. I just knew from that conversation that the bonuses I was to receive were for political purposes only, that I could not use them for my own personal expenses.
Does Mr. Bartlome have authority to grant bonuses?
No, I don't believe so.
Who does?
I believe Mr. Steinbrenner does.
What is your relationship with Mr. Steinbrenner?
I'm an employee of the American Shipbuilding Company. I've known Mr. Steinbrenner for some years.
In what capacity?
Well, he's a sports enthusiast, and I played sports, played football, and knew of him casually from that.
When you say played football with him, you mean you grew up in the same community?
Yes, we grew up in the same community.
Is there any question in your mind that, in fact, Mr. Steinbrenner was the moving force behind the bonuses and political contributions?
You're asking to speculate, Mr. Schultz?
No, I'm asking if there's any question in his mind. He stated before that he dealt specifically only with Mr. Bartlome, but I'm asking him whether in his mind he knows the moving force behind this.
I cannot say. I cannot answer that properly.
Well, does Mr. Steinbrenner delegate a lot of authority in the company?
There's delegation of authority, yes.
Then are you saying it's conceivable that Mr. Bartlome was delegated authority to grant these bonuses and that Mr. Steinbrenner would have no knowledge?
No, I don't believe that is true.
Then it's a fair statement to say that you believe Mr. Steinbrenner knew about the bonuses and or approved them.
Yes, I'd say so.
Did you receive a bonus in September of 1970?
Yes, I did.
And was this bonus granted for the specific purpose of raising monies for campaign contributions?
I'd like to interrupt at this point. Are you, is this contribution for presidential election of 1972?
I don't know, and I hadn't planned to ask that. I'm merely trying to establish the number of bonuses that were granted.
Could you repeat the question, please?
I believe my question was, what was the amount of the bonus in 1970?
In 1970, it was $5,000.
Did you receive a bonus in 1971, November of 1971?
Yes, I did.
And what was the gross amount of this bonus?
The same, $5,000.
And did you received a bonus on April 6th of 1972? What was the gross amount of this bonus?
$5,000.
What was the net amount of each of these three bonuses?
$3,700.
So from September of 1970 through April 6th of 1972, you received a net total amount of $11,100. Is that correct?
Yes.
And out of that $11,100, you contributed $3,100 to the two committees, to the committee to re-elect?
Yes.
Mr. Clark, are you aware of any other techniques that were used to raise campaign contributions by the company?
Yes, there was a time when Mr. Bartlome came to me and asked me to make out false expense reports.
When was this?
It was in 73. I believe it was February 73.
Sometime in 1973?
Early 73, yes.
Did these false vouchers result in a cash fund?
Very truthfully, I just turned over the expense voucher to Mr. Bartlome. I don't know what he did with it.
To your knowledge, were any of these funds used for the presidential campaign of 72 to clear up debts of...
Not to my knowledge.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
Mr. Clark, I just have a few questions here for clarification. Did Mr. Steinbrenner at any time ask you to make this contribution to the committee to re-elect the president?
No, he did not.
Did he ever discuss this contribution with you prior to your making it?
No, he did not.
I recall in your testimony you indicated that Mr. Steinbrenner had told you that he wanted to go to the special prosecutor?
Yes.
Did he go to the special prosecutor?
Not to my knowledge, sir.
And I believe you testified that he did not because of advice of someone. Who advised him not to go, sir?
Well, most of the time when Mr. Steinbrenner made this statement, he just would say his attorneys. Although I do think on one occasion he did mention they were Mr. Melcher and Mr. McMahon.
So it is your testimony that at no time did Mr. Steinbrenner request, direct, or ask you to make this contribution?
That's correct.
Thank you very much, sir. Senator Whiteman?
I have no questions.
Senator Montoya?
No questions.
Counsel?
I have no further questions, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Clark, thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
Senator Inouye has called a 5-minute recess, and we're also going to take a short break. Public television coverage of the Senate Watergate hearings will continue after station identification.
Unabridged coverage of the hearings is being broadcast as a public service by your local public television station. This is PBS, the Public Broadcasting Service. We now rejoin NPAC's unabridged videotape coverage of today's hearings by the Senate Select Committee on Presidential Campaign Activities.
The hearing will please come to order.
Mr. Robert E. Bartlome.
The testimony you'll give to this select committee will be the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God. Thank you very much, sir.
Mr. Bartlome, you're accompanied by counsel. And counsel is the same counsel who has already identified himself of record for Mr. Clark. Do you have any statement, Mr. Bartlome, that you wish to read or give to the committee in advance of your testimony?
No, I do not.
What is your present position, Mr. Bartlome?
I'm Secretary of the American Shipbuilding Company.
And how long have you been with the company?
Since 1965.
Did you hold this position as Secretary of the company during that period of time?
No, since 1968.
All right. What position did you start at?
I started in the planning department, programming, assistant secretary, gradually promoted to secretary.
What salary do you now earn as secretary to the corporation?
$27,500.
Could you briefly describe your duties as secretary?
Well, everything pertaining to the board of directors meetings, minutes of the American Shipbuilding Company.
We now rejoin NPAC's unabridged videotaped coverage of today's hearings by the Senate Select Committee on Presidential Campaign Activities.
The hearing will please come to order.
Mr. Robert E. Bartlome.
The testimony you will give to this select committee will be the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God. Thank you very much, sir.
Mr. Bartlome, you're accompanied by counsel. And counsel is the same counsel who has already identified himself of record for Mr. Clark. Do you have any statement, Mr. Bartlome, that you wish to read or give to the committee in advance of your testimony?
No, I do not.
What is your present position, Mr. Bartlome?
I'm Secretary of the American Shipbuilding Company.
And how long have you been with the company?
Since 1965.
Did you hold this position as Secretary of the company during that period of time?
No, since 1968.
All right. What position did you start at?
I started in the planning department, programming, assistant secretary, gradually promoted to secretary.
What salary do you now earn as secretary to the corporation?
$27,500.
Could you briefly describe your duties as secretary?
Well, everything pertaining to the board of directors meetings, minutes of the American Shipbuilding Company and all of our subsidiaries, stockholders' information, correspondence.
Now, as part of your compensation, in addition to your salary, did you regularly receive bonuses from the corporation which you were to keep for your own use?
No.
In fact, did you receive specific bonuses, especially one in 1972 from the company?
Yes.
Could you briefly tell the committee how and when you learned about the bonus program, from whom, and what the program was?
It started back in 1970 in a meeting with Mr. Steinbrenner, Mr. Lipkowski, and I.
Could you just sort of speak a little slower so that we can all hear you?
Okay. Said there was a need to make...
This meeting now was Mr. Steinbrenner, and Mr. Steinbrenner is... what position does he hold in the corporation?
Chairman, Chief Executive Officer.
And who else was there?
Mr. Stanley J. Lipkowski.
And what was his position?
Treasurer and Controller.
All right, now, please tell us what happened at this meeting.
So there was a need to make contributions, and...
Who's speaking?
Mr. Steinbrenner. Suggested that Mr. Lipkowski and I develop a list of half a dozen or so trusted employees to whom we could grant bonuses, the net of which would be held for further word on distribution as contributions.
Now, when you speak of contributions, you mean political contributions?
These were all political contributions.
Now, did you arrange, by the way, were you the person that was going to implement the program?
Yes.
And did you arrange to implement this program and provide bonuses for political use of corporate funds to certain employees?
Yes.
Did you keep records, Mr. Bartlome, of these transactions?
Yes, I did.
What did the records contain? Can you describe basically what was in the record?
Basically, it was a sheet for each of the 8 individuals involved, had their name, gross amount of the bonus, tax withheld, net of the amount of the bonus, and the date and the amount and the person or recipient of each of the contributions.
Now, if you look at tab 7, and this is not part of the records that you just defined, by the way, you have with you, the staff has provided your counsel, a series of documents that are bound together with tabs. And if you look at tab 7, could you identify the document or the exhibit in tab 7?
It's payroll register of American Shipbuilding Company dated April 6, 1972 for the bonuses that were granted on that date.
And how many bonuses does this payroll register show?
9 of them.
And all in the amount of $5,000, is that true?
8 of them were in the amount of...
Oh, that's right. 8 in the amount of $5,000 and 1 to Mr. Bromhart in the amount of $2,325.17. Was there a special reason why that particular bonus was that particular fund?
I'm not aware.
Was that to a bonus given to him for political purposes?
Not that I know of.
All right, then the eight that are shown, the 8 each of 5,000. These were all given to the various employees listed in that payroll register for the purpose of political contributions.
Yes, sir.
And therefore, a total of $40,000 in bonuses.
Gross.
That was the gross. And the net pay to them amounted to what?
$26,200.
Now, what led up to the giving of these particular bonuses?
A meeting in Mr. Steinbrenner's office in which Mr. Steinbrenner, Mr. Lipkowski, and I were present. He said there was a need to make a contribution of $25,000.
He wanted you to arrange for a contribution of $25,000, right, from the employees.
Yes.
And using the bonus program, you arranged to have these 8 $5,000 bonuses given to the employees. Is that true?
Right.
Now, would you look also, it's that same tab 7, and one of the last 2 pages of that tab, you will see, I take it these are 8 checks. Are these the checks, do you identify the checks as the checks which were given to the employees showing the net amount of the bonus to each of the employees?
They're the payroll checks.
The payroll checks, and they represent the net amount given out. They're the net amount of the $5,000 after you take regular payroll deductions.
That's right.
Is that true? Now, when you gave these bonuses to each of the employees who are identified both in the payroll register and on these checks, how did these employees know what committees to make out a check for in the committee to elect the president?
I received a list of committees from Mr. Steinbrenner.
So you showed him this list, right?
No.
Or did you? Well, how did? We've already had some testimony just prior to your testimony, Mr. Clark, and he testified he received a little slip of paper from you which had the names of 2 committees on it, and that he made out his check to those 2 committees. Was this the procedure you followed with the other employees?
Yes.
And you took the names of the committees off the list you had?
Right.
You knew these to be committees for the re-election of the president?
Yes.
Now, did all the employees who received bonuses, these particular employees who appear on this exhibit on the payroll register and the checks, who received these bonuses, give you a check or checks back for a particular committee for the re-election committees?
Yes, for the total of $25,000.
Total of $25,000. There was a balance left over.
Yes.
And what was done with the balance?
Other contributions.
Did this become part of a cash fund?
Yes, for other contributions.
Now, what did you do with these checks that you received from the employees who were now sort of kicking back the checks for political contributions?
I received from Mr. Steinbrenner a name of a gentleman in Washington, an address, phone number, to which I was have a courier deliver these checks along with his personal contribution.
Do you now recall the name of the person you received, Mr. Steinbrenner?
The name of the person was Mr. Kalmbach.
Mr. Herbert Kalmbach?
I believe so.
And do you now recall the address that the checks were to be sent to?
1701 Pennsylvania.
And do you know what offices are at 1701 Pennsylvania Avenue?
The office of the committees.
Committee to re-elect the president.
Yes.
Now, if you look at tab 11, tab 11 is an affidavit made by Ronald H. Slater. Who is Ronald H. Slater?
He's a corporate vice president, works in the administration department of American Shipbuilding Company.
And was Mr. Slater the courier who took the checks to the committee to elect the president
Yes, he was.
And this is an affidavit, without reading it in its complete form, which attests to the fact that he did take the checks to the committee, that he flew to Washington, and that in the last paragraph, that on April 7, 1972, I went to my office, the Lorraine office building, and advised Mr. Bartlome that the gentleman to whom I was to deliver the envelope had not been there, and I had left the envelope with a lady in that office. And while in Mr. Bartlome's office that morning, Mr. Bartlome called Washington and talked to the gentleman to whom I was to deliver the envelope, and that gentleman told him that everything was in order. Now, in fact, is that what occurred?
In fact, I placed a call, and the gentleman was not there, but the call was later returned. I don't remember if he identified himself or not.
No. You're not sure whether you talked to Mr. Kalmbach?
Right.
You did talk to somebody, and somebody you talked to at the telephone of the Committee to Elect the President indicated everything was in order. They'd received the checks.
Right.
Mr. Dash,
yes.
In fairness to Mr. Slater, could the record also reflect, as his affidavit indicates, that he did not know the contents of the envelope?
Yes, I'm sorry. I didn't mean by trying to expedite the reading of the affidavit to leave out any important portion. Yes, the affidavit does indicate that he did not know the contents of the envelope.
Thank you, sir.
Now, if you look at tab 12, Mr. Bartlome, you'll notice that it's... Well, will you identify tab 12 for us?
It's the company's long-distance telephone log for April 7, 1972, wherein I placed through our operator a call to Washington.
And does it show that the person asked for was a Mr. Kalmbach?
It appears that way.
Well, it's actually spelled C-A-L-M-B-A-K or something, but it's
right.
Probably phonetically spelled, but reading Kalmbach. And the number 3330920 would be the number of the Committee to Elect the President.
All right.
So, in fact, you did make the call. You had a confirmation that the contributions had been received. Now, what was the total amount sent?
$100,000.
Now, how did it come to be $100,000? You collected $25,000 through the bonus arrangement with the employees. Who made up the balance of $75,000?
Mr. Steinbrenner gave me his personal contribution of $75,000, which was to accompany the 25 from the 8 employees.
Now, was that a personal check from Mr. Steinbrenner?
I believe it was 25 checks for $3,000 each.
That's right. The contributions were all in sort of $3,000 each, were they not?
Right.
And did Mr. Steinbrenner ever receive a bonus in the amount of $75,000?
1970.
And that was considerably before this particular contribution.
A year and a half.
Yes. Do you recall Mr. Steinbrenner ever receiving any other bonus?
Not prior to this time.
So the only bonus that you are able to testify to was a 1970 bonus of $75,000.
Right.
And it happens to be the same amount that Mr. Steinbrenner did contribute of his own personal funds to the amount of $25,000, which made up a total contribution of $100,000.
Right.
Was this the amount that you understood the committee expected the company to give?
I didn't know the reason for it.
No. Now, did anyone question this program that was set up by Mr. Steinbrenner when it was originally set up?
Only one. Mr. Lipkowski questioned it.
What did he say? I mean, in what way did he question it?
He wanted to know, I believe he wanted to know whether it was appropriate to and legal to do this. Mr. Steinbrenner advised him that many corporations in the United States do it in this manner, or in a similar manner.
Now, you've testified that you kept records of the transactions where bonuses were given, checks were received back for political contributions, and indicating who, in fact, received these contributions. Mr. Bartlome, what happened to your records?
one day in a visit in my office, Mr. Steinbrenner was shown the records for some reason. I don't recall the reason. Later, he contacted Mr. Lepkowski, and a meeting was scheduled that afternoon. He asked Mr. Lepkowski to bring any records that we might have at Lorraine, which would show the bonuses and the distribution of the bonuses and the dates.
Do you recall about when this was that you were asked to turn these records over to Mr. Lepkowski and he took it over to Lorraine and to Mr. Steinbrenner?
To the best that I can recall, it was around April of '73.
Do you know what happened to those records?
Mr. Lepkowski advised me that Mr. Steinbrenner had destroyed the records.
Now, did you personally receive a bonus in 1972?
Yes.
And you were one of those who received a $5,000 bonus?
Yes.
And you made out a check to a committee?
Yes.
If you look at tab 8, and tab 8 is a copy, a photocopy of a check drawn on a joint account to the Dedicated Americans for Effective Government, on April 6, 1972, in the amount of $3,000, signed by you. Is that the check that you made out?
Yes.
And is the Dedicated Americans for Effective Government one of the committees on your list of the committees to elect the president?
Yes.
How was the gross amount of $40,000 in bonuses kept on the corporate books?
Well, that was an expense charged to a OSS researcher claim.
And when you say expense, it was treated as a business expense?
Yes.
Now, in January 1973, when some questions were being asked about the bonuses, did Mr. Steinbrenner direct you to arrange a, quote, legitimate bonus payment plan, unquote?
We issued a bonus in January of 1973, which was not for contributions.
These were not for political contributions?
Right.
And would it be fair to say that these were being issued for what would be called cosmetic purposes?
I believe so.
Mr. Steinbrenner then was concerned about the fact that these bonuses that had been given to employees and kicked back as political contributions might cause a problem?
I don't know the reason.
Were you later asked to prepare a corporate record of the bonuses to show that they were for business purposes?
Yes.
Would you look at tab 9? And is that the memo that you prepared for that purpose?
Yes, it is.
It's dated April 5, 1972. It's memo to file. It's on paper with the printed American Shipbuilding Company on it. And it states, Mr. George M. Steinbrenner III today determined that the Amship Division had performed in an extraordinary manner and determined that the following received the bonuses approved in November 11, 1971 Board of Directors meeting, listing Mr. Lepkowski, Mr. Bartlome, Mr. Cushionen, Mr. Kissel, Mr. Clark, Mr. Stafford, Mr. Walker, Mr. Dibble, and Mr. Baumhart. And except for Mr. Baumhart, the others are all for $5,000. Is that right?
Right.
Now, this in effect was a false memo to the file, was it not?
Right.
Were you also asked to prepare certificates or statements to be signed by the recipients of these bogus bonuses, which allege that they were bona fide and not connected with any political contribution?
I didn't prepare the statements. I was asked to have them signed.
Do you know who prepared the statements?
Mr. Melcher.
And he gave them to you and asked you to have them signed. By whom? Signed by whom?
By gentlemen that received the bonuses in 1972 and 1973.
And did you, in fact, distribute these to the various persons and have them sign them?
Yes, I did.
Now, if you look back to tab 4, we've already had testimony from Mr. Clark, and he apparently retained his certificate, which we read into the record, indicating that this contribution was a bona fide one, made voluntarily of his own choosing, and that nobody had asked him to make any political contributions. Do you recognize and identify that as
a
certificate, and that similar or identical certificates were given to all the other persons?
True.
These were, in fact, false certificates.
Yes.
In August, did you learn that agents of the Federal Bureau of Investigation wanted to interview you about political contributions?
Yes.
Did you discuss this with Mr. Steinbrenner?
We discussed it a couple of days prior to the interview, approximately April 19th.
All right, what, if anything, did Mr. Steinbrenner tell you about this interview that you're about to have?
He related a story to us, which was the basis of my testimony.
What story did he relate to you?
That the group in Lorraine had determined that they wanted to make contributions to the committees to re-elect the president, that we had approached Mr. Steinbrenner asking the best manner in which we could make a contribution. We were told if it was a small contribution to do it locally. If it was a large contribution, he would furnish us the names of committees, and that the money could be delivered in Washington.
Now, did you in fact give this kind of statement to the agents of the FBI?
Yes, I did.
And would you look at tab 10? And tab 10 appears to be a statement dated August 23, 1973, Lorraine, Ohio, a statement at the end of which is attested that I have read the statement consisting of this and 6 other pages, and I have established each page, I've initialed each page, and each correction in the statement is true and correct to the best of my recollection, signed by Robert E. Bartlome. Is this the statement, or a copy of the statement that you gave to the FBI?
Yes, it is.
Yes. Now, without going into a full reading of the statement, in essence, does this statement incorporate the story that Mr. Steinbrenner had talked to you about, the fact that this was a voluntary contribution and that you were giving it out of your own funds?
Yes.
And in effect, this was a false statement? What?
Yes.
Did you show this statement to any of the other employees?
We exchanged the statements among us after they had been, after we had, Mr. Lepkowski and I had been interviewed.
And what was the purpose of exchanging the statements?
Well, there were questions and inquiries on the parts of the other 6. Since they had not been interviewed at that time, they wanted to know what was asked and how we answered them.
And as a matter of fact, in between your interview and some of the others, you had discussions and meetings with some of these other employees who had received bonuses.
Not scheduled meetings, but
not scheduled.
Many meetings.
You met. And was it a general agreement that you would all be given the same story?
I believe so.
And that you showed these statements so that they could give consistent statements themselves?
Right.
By the way, did you see any of the statements that some of these employees gave to the FBI?
Only Mr. Lepkowski's.
Right. It is true that each of the employees who gave the statements was able to make a copy of the statement that he gave.
Yes.
Now, did you learn that the employees who had been involved received subpoenas to testify before the special grand jury in Washington, D.C.?
Yes.
Did you receive, when did you learn that, by the way? Approximately.
August 31st.
Did you receive a call from Mr. Steinbrenner on August 31st, 1972?
Yes, I did.
And later meet with him?
Yes.
Could you briefly tell us about that meeting?
Told me that Mr. Clark had received the subpoena and was to appear before the grand jury on September the 5th, and that we probably all would be receiving subpoenas, but we would not have to go before the grand jury. He again recalled the story, which was basically the same as in the FBI interview statement.
In other words, in this meeting, he restated to you in his own words the so-called story, the fact that there was a meeting and that all the employees had on their own decided to give contributions for the re-election of the president out of their own funds.
Yes.
What did you say to Mr. Steinbrenner at that time, if anything?
It was my feeling that from the conversations with the gentleman that they would not perjure themselves if they went before the grand jury.
Did you say anything about what you would do?
I said I would not perjure myself.
Did you again meet with Mr. Steinbrenner on September 1st, which is the very next day?
Yes.
And was there anything particular about that conversation of note?
Same conversation.
Same thing, and Mr. Steinbrenner again sort of renewing his recollection, or at least what he would like to be the story told to you.
His recollection of what happened on the granting of the bonuses.
Did you dispute that with him, or did you understand that to be as just an effort to just try to get the story straight?
One of the meetings here in the next 2-3 days, I did discuss with him what
All
I
right,
felt to be the truth.
On apparently Labor Day, there was a meeting. We've already heard testimony from Mr. Clark, and you attended that meeting.
Yes.
September 3. Who else was there?
Mr. Clark, Mr. Lepkowski, and myself.
Yeah. Was this a meeting with Mr. Steinbrenner?
Yes, it was.
And can you briefly tell us what was discussed, what Mr. Steinbrenner said, and what was said by others at the meeting, including yourself?
Told him that could not testify to the accuracy of the FBI statement, that the rest of the fellows would not perjure themselves, and we were told, don't worry, you won't have to go before the grand jury.
Now, as Steinbrenner told you that you don't have to worry about anything, you won't have to go before the grand jury.
Right.
What was your state of mind at that time? Did that satisfy you?
No.
Were you in fact worried?
Absolutely.
Did you, after that meeting, or shortly after that meeting, meet with Mr. Clark and Mr. Lepkowski in a parking lot?
Yes, we did.
And what was the purpose of that?
To discuss our conversations that we had with Mr. Steinbrenner, and we sort of agreed that the only way to go was to tell the truth.
Now, was the grand jury appearance, which I understand was set originally for September 5, 1973, postponed?
Yes.
Was that postponed?
It was postponed 2 weeks.
And do you know when it was postponed? I think the record would show that it was September 18th.
18th.
Yes.
September 18th.
Now, prior, however, to the September 5 date, when the original grand jury appearance was set, on September 4, did you meet with Mr. Steinbrenner?
Yes, I did.
Who else was there?
Mr. Lepkowski, Mr. McMahon, Mr. Melcher.
And what did Mr. Steinbrenner say at that meeting?
Basically related the same recollection as to how the contributions and why they were made, that if they were large or small, how they would be made and distributed. You remember that on the bonus list there were only 2 of the gentlemen, not the 8, and that he could recollect moving the payment of the bonus up to April 6th, or authorizing the movement of the payment up to April 6th.
What did you say at that meeting?
I told him that this was not the way it was handled, and I again mentioned in this meeting that the gentleman, it was my feeling, would not perjure themselves, but would tell the truth before the grand jury.
Did Mr. Steinbrenner react to that when, in fact, did somebody at that meeting say, finally, we've learned the truth?
Well, that was a following meeting with Mr. McMahon and Mr. Melcher.
Was Mr. Steinbrenner at that meeting?
The same day.
Right, same day. Mr. Steinbrenner was at that meeting?
Yes, he was.
Yes, and did Mr. Steinbrenner make any statement of reaction to the fact that the truth might come out?
I was questioned by Mr. McMahon and related to him what I felt was the true story, and he said something to the effect, well, now we have finally learned the truth.
And what did Mr. Steinbrenner say?
Well, Mr. Steinbrenner was distraught, and I believe he did not change his recollection of what happened at that time.
Is it correct, do you recall, that he laid his head on the desk and said he was ruined and the company might be ruined, and he mentioned something about jumping off the bridge?
That was in the meeting with without Melcher and McMahon upstairs in his office between him and me.
Right. Now, on September 6th, there was a meeting with all employees with Mr. Steinbrenner. Apparently there were meetings during this period of time almost on a daily basis.
An hourly basis.
On an hourly basis. I take it you were being told, as Mr. Clark has testified, that you should not worry, and these hourly meetings indicated, I take it, that you were worrying.
Yes.
What took place on the September 6th meeting with all the employees involved with Mr. Steinbrenner?
They weren't all there. There were about 6 of them there.
Yeah.
And a couple of them advised Mr. Steinbrenner that they could not testify that the FBI statement was the truth. I believe Mr. Kissel and Mr. Cushman were not at the meeting.
And did Mr. Steinbrenner make any other statements at that point? Did he mention, was that the meeting in which he mentioned that counsel, another lawyer was going to be coming in and coordinating the matter?
Yes.
And was said Mr. Edward Bennett Williams was coming in?
Judge Lawless would be coordinating.
Judge Lawless? You again met with Mr. Steinbrenner September 9. And was this another meeting in which he was recalling the facts as he had been doing continuously?
Same recollection.
Now, we've heard testimony about a meeting with Judge Lawless, who was an attorney, a former judge. And this was on September 11th. Did you attend that meeting?
Yes, I did.
And who else was at that meeting?
Well, it's quite a group.
Well, again, this was the involved group, would you say?
Yes.
Could you tell us briefly what the purpose of that meeting was?
Mr. Lawless was trying to advise us as to what was happening down here in Washington. He was trying to explain how we got called. He advised us he was not counseling us or advising us on what to do.
He was not indicating that he was acting as your lawyer.
Right.
Just giving you some friendly advice.
He gave us friendly advice and said we should not perjure ourselves, for the penalty for perjury was far more severe than it was for the other crimes that we were.
But did he indicate that you were in any serious problem?
No, he did not.
In fact, did he sort of indicate how put your particular contributions in any priority form, or did that come out in any discussion of that nature?
Well, he's described ours as being gray. We were not either black or white. We were gray.
And did any discussion come up about possibly getting immunity? Or what procedures one would follow to get immunity?
I don't recall.
Was there any discussion that you would best have counsel?
Yes.
Was there any discussion concerning postponement or delay?
The postponement we had received was the best that we could do at the time.
I can't hear. Will you say that very clearly?
The postponement that we had received from the grand jury to 2-week postponement was the best thing that we could do until we had received legal counsel.
Your own legal counsel?
Right.
Now, in fact, you did obtain counsel. Could you tell us how you went about obtaining counsel?
We were sent to Washington on Saturday, September the 15th. We went to a law firm who advised us there might be some conflict of interest, and several of the group, I believe 8, were sent over to the law firm of Sachs Greenbaum. We gave them brief statements. They advised us that Mr. Lepkowski and I were officers of the company. There might be some conflict between us and the other 6. And it would be best that the 2 of us would try and obtain separate legal counsel.
And did you?
On Monday, the 17th, around 4 o'clock, we did.
And what counsel was that?
Wilmer Cutler and Pickering.
And did you meet with the special prosecutor shortly after that?
Met with him on Wednesday, the 19th.
And did you agree at that time to cooperate with the special prosecutor
Yes,
and tell the full story concerning these events?
Yes.
Were you offered immunity?
Yes.
And in fact, were you granted immunity?
Yes.
Did you in fact testify before the grand jury?
Same day.
And did you testify to the grand jury to the same facts you testified today before this committee?
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, I have no further questions, and I think for the record it should be stated that both with Mr. Bartlome and also with Mr. Clark, that their testimony before this committee has been given under also a grant of immunity signed by Judge Sirica at the application of our committee by unanimous vote of the committee, and that the testimony that they have given today is covered by this grant of immunity. Also, now what I'd like to do, having all the exhibits 1 through 12 having been referred to, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to have them identified for the record as they have been during the testimony and introduced in evidence.
Without objection, so ordered.
I have no further questions.
Mr. Schultz.
Mr. Bartlome, may I direct your attention to your telephone conversation on or about April 6th, 7th, in confirming that the checks had in fact been received at 1701 Pennsylvania. I take it that your testimony is that you are not absolutely certain that you talked to Mr. Kalmbach, however, someone confirmed that they in fact received the checks. Is that correct?
I don't know who I talked to. Some gentleman.
Did the gentleman that you talked to give any indication that he knew that the checks represented a contribution from corporate funds?
No, sir.
To your knowledge, does any Republican official know that the contributions, or did they at that time, know that these contributions were made by use of corporate funds?
I don't believe so.
In your conversation with Mr. Steinbrenner just prior to the bonus for $25,000, or the raising of $25,000 through the bonus scheme, did he indicate to you who had made the request for funds, if anyone?
He did not.
Did he indicate to you that any promises had been made to induce this contribution? Did he indicate to you that he had been threatened or coerced to raise this contribution? I'd like to go back now to 1970 when the bonus scheme first developed. Would you describe for us the conversation that you had with Mr. Steinbrenner and Mr. Lepkowski? How did this come about?
It was a meeting in Mr. Steinbrenner's office attended by Mr. Lepkowski and myself. Mr. Steinbrenner stated that he was under pressure to make contributions.
Did he say by whom?
No, he did not. He suggested that we develop a list of loyal employees who would participate in this plan.
And did he direct that you would implement this program?
Yes.
And did you in fact tell each employee of their bonus how much they were to contribute and to whom?
Yes, I did.
Did you tell each employee that you were doing this at the direction of Mr. Steinbrenner?
I can't recall now.
Do you think you told some of them?
Yes.
Do you have authority to grant bonuses or sign the authority for bonuses to be granted?
No.
Who does have that authority?
Mr. Steinbrenner.
Does anybody else have that authority?
No.
When was the first bonus issued?
September the 27th, 1970.
Was there any other bonus issued in September of 1970?
Yes, there was.
Was that for, there was another bonus besides the one September 27th, 1970?
Yes. It's not in the file, but I believe there was. It was charged to the U.S. Coast Guard claim.
Was Mr. Steinbrenner granted a bonus in October of 1970?
Yes, he was.
What was the amount of the bonus?
It was There's two bonuses, one for $37,500 in 1970, one for $37,500 in fiscal 1971.
Isn't it a fact that these bonuses were paid on October 9th and October 12th, 1970?
Yes.
You told Mr. Dash earlier that subsequent to the bonus scheme and in April of 1970, you entered false statements to the file, I believe were your words, concerning the bonuses that had been granted.
April of 73.
April of 73. In connection with Mr. Steinbrenner's bonus, did you enter any memorandum into the file or change any of the records?
Yes.
Well, as secretary of the company, did you sit in on the corporate meetings?
Yes, I did.
Was Mr. Steinbrenner's bonus granted by the Board of Directors, by action of the Board of Directors?
Yes, it was.
Did you write the minutes for this meeting?
Yes.
Is this the change that you referred to just a minute ago?
Yes.
What change did you make?
Well, we deleted the words that it was granted for the effective work on settlement of U.S. Coast Guard claim and changed it to read for the effective operation of the company during the year just ended.
Why was this change made?
I do not know.
Who directed you to make the change?
Mr. Steinbrenner.
Was the change made at the direction of the Board of Directors?
No.
Mr. Steinbrenner directed you to change the minutes of the meeting, is that correct?
Yes.
What was the gross amount of the September 27th, 1970 bonus?
$30,000.
What was the net amount?
$19,750.
What was the gross amount of the bonus in November 1971?
$25,000.
And what was the net amount of that November bonus?
$16,530.
$16,530?
Right.
And what was the gross amount of the April 6th bonus?
$42,325.
And what was the net amount of this bonus?
$26,200.
I don't know if you have it added up there. What was the total amount of the bonuses, the gross amount?
Gross amount was approximately $97,000. The net amount was approximately $62,000.
Out of the $62,000 net amount, was the $25,000 sent to the committee to re-elect the only contribution made to the 1972 presidential campaign?
As far as I know.
Did Mr. Steinbrenner ever direct you in how to answer the inquiries of the FBI?
Did not direct me how.
Would you explain how you gained an inference of what he wanted you to say?
In the meeting that I had 2 days prior to the FBI interview with him, he related a story which I took to be an inference, and that was the basis for my testimony.
What did he tell you?
He told me that the group in Lorraine had had several meetings out there, and we had determined to make a contribution. That I had came to Mr. Steinbrenner and asked him the best manner into which we were to make a contribution. He told me that if the contribution was small, it should be done through the local Republican Party. If it was large, he would furnish us a list of committees and the contribution we made in Washington.
Did you subsequently ride in a car with Mr. Lepkowski and Mr. Steinbrenner where this story was again repeated on your way to the grand jury?
Yes.
And what did you tell him at that time?
It was on Wednesday, September the 5th. He related the same story as he had in the past. He asked us if we could live with this story, everything would be all right because we were not going before the grand jury anyway.
Did he indicate to you on this September 5th meeting what your relationship should be with him at this point?
He said there should be a separation between us.
What did he mean by that?
I do not know.
Did he further clarify what he meant by that?
No, he did not.
Mr. Bartlome, do you have knowledge of another technique employed by the American Shipbuilding Company to raise monies for the purpose of making campaign contributions?
Yes.
What is that?
In early 1973, several of us issued expense reports, the net of which were reserved for contributions.
How many employees were involved in that?
3 or 4.
I take it that the employee submitted a false voucher and received cash for it. Is that correct?
Received the false voucher, and the cash was stored in the cashier's office.
What was the total amount of money raised under this scheme?
Approximately $1,800.
To your knowledge, was any of this money dispersed for the presidential campaign of 1972?
No.
Thank you. I have no further questions, Mr. Chairman.
Just one question, Mr. Bartlome. Did Mr. Steinbrenner elaborate upon the word need? In
No,
your
he did
testimony, you said that there was a need to make a contribution.
No, he advised me that there was pressure for contribution, but did not elaborate.
Did he say where the pressure was coming from?
No, he did not.
Thank you very much. Senator Weicker? Senator Montoya?
Mr. Bartlome, your summary, which is on file before the committee, it is indicated that you are also vice president and a director of the Lorraine Lyria Sand Company, secretary and a director of the Cincinnati Sheet Metal and Roofing Company, the Nashville Bridge Company, Kinsman Marine Transit Company, Great Lakes International Corporation, Great Lakes Association, Inc., and Biogest Corporation. Are any of these subsidiaries of American Shipbuilding Company?
All but the first one.
Were they tapped for any bonuses, which in turn were used for political contributions?
Not that I'm aware of.
Did you receive any bonuses from these companies?
No, sir.
Did American Shipbuilding or any of these companies receive any subsidies from the government under the shipbuilding subsidy program?
We are building ships under the Title 11 insurance program.
Were any subsidies received by the company?
I don't understand the question, Senator.
Was there any subsidy received by the American Shipbuilding or any of these companies from the government under the shipbuilding subsidy program? I don't recall what title or what law it is.
No, I don't know. I do not know.
Were you building any ships for the federal government?
No, sir.
Now, what conversation transpired in the Board of Directors room with respect to the memo of April 5th, if any?
None.
Was there any formal meeting of the Board of Directors to discuss this particular question and the giving of bonuses?
At the annual meeting following the annual meeting of stockholders.
And when was that?
It would have been approximately November.
And what was the discussion with respect to these bonuses?
The chairman is given authority to grant bonuses to individuals where he sees need.
And were these bonuses approved, discussed and approved within the context that they in turn be used for funneling campaign contributions by the recipients?
No.
When did you first hear that these bonuses would be used for such a purpose?
1970.
And this was not discussed at the Board of Directors meeting?
No.
Do you have any reason to assume that the Board of Directors were very much aware that that was the purpose of the bonuses?
I'm not aware that they knew.
Now, you mentioned this morning that American Shipbuilding was represented by the firm of Mudge, Rose, and I believe Alexander and Guthrie. Did you not?
No, I did not.
Does this firm represent American Shipbuilding, or have they in the past represented your firm?
They have handled some legal cases.
And isn't that the former Nixon, the firm that President Nixon was associated with?
Yes.
Do you know who made the first contact with the officers of American Shipbuilding for this particular contribution?
No, I do not.
How did the name of Kalmbach enter into the picture, and which resulted in your calling him at 1701 or 1706 Pennsylvania Avenue?
I received the name, the address, and the phone number to which the contribution checks were to be delivered.
Did you have any trouble getting an answer from Mr. Kalmbach to whom the call was directed?
The party was not there when I first called. We left word, and a call was returned. I do not know who returned the call.
For all intents and purposes, is it your assumption that Mr. Kalmbach, to whom the call was directed, did, in fact, return the call?
I don't know that to be a fact.
Did he identify himself?
I don't recall.
That's all.
Yes, I just have a couple questions. Senator Montoya just asked you who gave how did you know to either call Mr. Kalmbach or send the checks through the courier to Mr. Kalmbach. Who gave you Mr. Kalmbach's name?
Mr. Steinbrenner.
Mr. Steinbrenner. Now, you've mentioned, Mr. Bartlome, that Mr. Steinbrenner mentioned that he was receiving some pressure. And I take it that this whole bonus plan, which turns out to be a use of corporate funds for illegal contributions for campaign purposes, as a sort of dodge to make it look like individuals in the company, employees, were making personal gifts, was not a very pleasant one for you. Is that true?
It's true.
And that, as a matter of fact, you've gone through a considerable amount of personal suffering, family suffering as a result of this plan.
True.
You testified that when Mr. Lepkowski questioned the program, that Mr. Steinbrenner said that a lot of corporations do this, a great many corporations do it. Do you, of your own knowledge, know that this is sort of part of corporate giving?
No.
But at least at American Shipbuilding, this plan was in operation.
Right.
Do you feel this is an appropriate thing for a corporation to do in a political campaign?
No.
As a matter of fact, you knew this was these were illegal corporation contributions.
Not at the origin, but later, yes.
You now know.
Yes.
And you presently testified that you don't feel this is an appropriate method, certainly, of a corporation using its money through this kind of a ruse to give political contributions. Having really gone through this experience yourself and as the secretary of the corporation, do you have any recommendations that you may want to make to this committee concerning corporate gifts? What legislation that we may want to consider involving the situation you found yourself in and the other employees?
I haven't considered any proposal.
We don't need any additional laws to make these this particular act illegal, and I take it the obstruction of justice that may have been involved is also covered by our criminal laws. But it's obviously that pressures were on to get money and to get money from corporations and to have it routed through these bonus plans. Do you consider that we've heard this from other witnesses, that the pressure of obtaining money for political campaigns actually produces this kind of illegal activity?
I'm not aware that it does. I had no other knowledge of this.
Well, you are aware it happened in American Shipbuilding Company?
Yes.
Would you want this committee to seriously take this into consideration in its recommendations for legislation?
Yes.
I have no further questions, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Schultz. I wanted to be certain, Mr. Bartlome, that are you through conferring with counsel?
Mr. Dash, I may see some problem in Senator Montoya's question about government ships that the company was building. In 1972, we were not, but prior to that time, we had built some government ships.
Just some clarification of your response to Senator Montoya's question.
Yes, there's some confusion we wanted to clarify.
Yeah. By the way, are there any claims that your company have against the government at the present time?
The OSS researcher claim has been turned down by the government. I don't know the plans of the company now.
Do you know when that was turned down?
Sometime in 72.
Who turned down the claim?
I don't know.
Do you have any other particulars or details concerning the claim?
No.
Who might have that information?
Mr. Steinbrenner.
I wanted to clarify, Mr. Bartlome, for my own mind, I'd asked the question about your conversations with Mr. Steinbrenner, both in the April 1972 preceding the contribution. At that time, do I understand your statement is that he told you he had a need to raise $25,000?
Right.
And in September of 1970, when the bonus plan first came up, he said that he was under pressure to make campaign contributions?
Contributions, yes.
Did he repeat that statement in April of 72, that he was under pressure to make campaign contributions?
No.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
Hearing will stand at recess until 10 o'clock tomorrow morning.
And that was it. Just 2 short hours with the American Shipbuilding Company story, the only business of the day. The firm's president, by the way, George Steinbrenner, is to be interviewed in executive session later. Tomorrow and Thursday, executives from the Ashland Oil Company, Minnesota Mining and Manufacturing Company, Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company, Braniff Airways, American Airlines, and the Gulf Oil Corporation are scheduled to testify publicly about their efforts in this political contributions field. Several of them have already admitted to having illegally contributed corporate funds to political campaigns last year. A Gulf Oil vice president, for instance, went before a federal judge in Washington this morning and pleaded guilty to such charges and was fined. Yesterday, the head of Braniff Airways did the same. All right, at any rate, this whole business of big money and political campaigns is indeed an intriguing subject. And here now at the Senator's table with Peter Kay to talk about it is Mike McClister, president of Baker and McClister Associates here in Washington, a consultant firm which advises political candidates on how to run their campaigns and how to raise money. Peter?
Mike, we heard today a classic and an involved story of political subterfuge in very elaborate detail, how campaign contributions were concealed as bonuses. And since you've been in the political arena some time yourself, you might be able to shed some light on a question that occurred to me. Since this all was done before a federal law became effective,
maybe for corporate reasons of their own, maybe for bookkeeping purposes internally. They chose a method to involve 8 people, to have a man who makes $16,000 a year then give a $3,000 contribution to a political campaign. All of this elaborate mechanism to handle $25,000, and then $75,000 handled, very quickly by the chairman and chief executive officer of the company. So I can't answer that question. I think it just, it may suggest to us the laxity of that time and that atmosphere. If they had got it done by April 6th, it didn't really matter how they did it. And I think that's the thinking that went on at that time.
The other thing, in addition to the elaborate mechanism that impressed me about today's testimony, was that it was a classic case of quid pro quo. This company wanted to get a benefit, a cost overrun benefit directly from the federal government, and apparently thought that by contributing they could get it, which incidentally they didn't.
They didn't, that's right.
Now, the question, of course, is, how typical is this? Is quid pro quo a big reason for giving campaign money?
Well, I think it's easy to think so, Peter. Listening to testimony today and listening and reading the newspapers, and
the revelations that have come out in the whole Watergate period, I don't think it is a very common occurrence in politics, the specific quid pro quo. People give money for various reasons, the political campaigns. And I think George Gallup says only 7% of the people in the country actually contribute to any political campaign. But that 7% was enough to get about $400 million or so contributed in 1972 at all levels. And I dare say that a very small proportion of that would be the specific quid pro quo. I will give you so much if you will do this, some government favor or something. But today's testimony obviously at least was an implied. The pressure started with Mr. Steinbrenner and was translated right down the line.
Let's talk about Mr. Steinbrenner for a minute, who I understand has also been a major contributor to the Democratic Party and to former Vice President Humphrey. Here's a man who switched during the campaign, as many people did last year, but there's also indications many big money contributors play both sides of the political street. Has that been your experience?
That's been true in some of the campaigns I've been in before. It's not necessarily to say it's always a sinister way of going about it, but
it may not be sinister, but it's pretty cynical, isn't it?
Well, I think, sure, it's cynical, and there's no sense trying to pretend that it isn't. I think it's an attempt to buy not maybe a quid pro quo exchange, but good faith, goodwill, access to the governor, the congressman, the senator, whoever he may be. And so many corporations and many individual contributors sort of hedge their bet. They play both sides.
At the beginning of the program, we heard Gene Wyman, who had been one of the most successful Democratic fundraisers, say that he had hoped there'd be federal legislation to put him out of business, that the only real equity would be some sort of a tax write-off by the public. Do you think such a thing is reasonable to expect?
I hope it is, Peter. I think more and more we're coming around to that. Now, last year, of course, there was a possibility of having a deduction from your part of your income tax being used to contribute to campaigns, except they made it so administratively impossible by having a separate form that many people didn't know about it, and the contributions were very low. I think next year there will be on the front page of the 1040 form an opportunity to check off $1 or whatever it is to campaigns. I think Gene Wyman was exactly right. The legislation we have today that has been passed by the Senate in this session, as you know, it seems to me is only one side of the coin. It makes it very, very tough on all the honest candidates who are running, and I think public financing and something of that type has got to come on the other side in order to make it balanced.
Well, now, you mentioned the ease of convenience in making it possible, but given the light of Watergate and the view that people must have for politicians nowadays, do you think that people are really going to want to dig down in their pockets and contribute to political campaigns in today's climate?
I don't know. That's a tough question. I hope so. I hope Watergate hasn't poisoned the whole political system. But, I think that's something down the road we'll have to see. If it has, then I still think some kind of public financing has got to come.
Do you think this committee can actually sit down and write something that's going to take care of some of these abuses, or are we pipe dreaming to think so?
Well, I think it can take care of some of them. If you get a situation like the testimony we had today, there was a willingness to commit a crime, because even before April 7th, it was against the law for a corporation to make a contribution. So there was a willingness there to commit a crime, and then a willingness later, at least, to commit various forms of perjury. Now, when you have that, I'm not sure any law can finally and forever stop that kind of an operation, where there's a concerted effort and a willingness to break a law.
Now, all of that occurred earlier in the Senate caucus room. The proceedings did run a bit short today, so we thought we'd provide a little Watergate special PS tonight. With me now, back in the studio, are Washington Star-News political investigative reporter Jim Polk and Peter Lisagor, Washington bureau chief of the Chicago Daily News and a regular on our Washington Week in Review program. Jim has been following this overall investigation of campaign financing very closely. In fact, it's his journalistic specialty right now. And Peter has been on top of the new move by President Nixon to reestablish his credibility over Watergate matters with members of Congress. Peter, now this was the second day of those meetings over at the White House, the meetings that the President has been having with members of Congress. What's your reading of how it's going so far?
Well, it's one of the most interesting public relations exercise I think the President has ever undertaken, Jim. According to his spokesman, he was to meet the Watergate issue and related scandals and charges and allegations case by case, head to head. His first meeting with the Republican Coordinating Committee, which was sort of the opener, was a 40-minute monologue in which no questions were asked at all. His second meeting last night was with a group of 6 Southern Democratic senators and one Harry Byrd of Virginia, an independent, and they barely discussed Watergate. They discussed the Middle East, the energy crisis, the Soviet-American détente, Soviet-Chinese problems, and only in passing at the end did they discuss Watergate at all, and no questions were asked. Now tonight he's had, perhaps at this hour they're still there, he's had the first batch of Republican senators in, about a third of the 43 Republican members. Whether there will be any questions asked tonight, we don't yet know. But if they don't ask questions about Watergate, he's hardly going to reestablish any credibility or the trust that he is pledged now to reestablish.
Well, Peter, whose fault is it that there are no questions? It's the senators.
It's the senators' fault, absolutely. The Democrats didn't even want to discuss Watergate. Of course, they were the Southern Democratic supporters of the president by and large. Senator Eastman of Mississippi, Senator Sparkman, Senator McClellan, Senator Allen, Senator Russell Long. They didn't want to discuss Watergate at all. They didn't want to just bother with it. Now, the question that remains is whether the president's going to invite the hostile Democratic senators who do want to discuss Watergate. And Senator Tower, for one, the Republican from Texas, says that the president's most reluctant to invite hostile Democrats down to the White House and make a pitch on Watergate. So it's kind of a curious exercise so far. Now, they may really come to grips with it. But the real key, I think, here, Jim, is that most of the congressmen and senators do not know well enough to ask relevant kinds of questions and to cross-examine the president, which is necessary in this situation. The only group that knows that is the Senate Watergate Committee, and they have, to a man, said they will not go to the White House under these circumstances.
They want to go as a group.
As a group to interrogate the president, specifically to interrogate him, not to listen to monologues, rationales, explanations, but to ask relevant, pertinent questions which have not been answered, to try to correct some of the inconsistencies and contradictions in the whole White House case.
But let me interrupt just a second. Even that will have its limitations. For the request today to talk to the president at the White House allowed him, if he would choose to meet with him, even that is unlikely, for the president to answer without being under oath.
That's right.
You mean the request of the Watergate Committee?
The request of the Watergate Committee.
All right, let me ask you this. Have any of the congressmen or senators raised the question that, wait a minute, maybe we should not talk about Watergate with the president because, after all, the House is now considering impeachment proceedings, and the members of the House are going to may eventually have to vote on that, and if, in fact, they do vote impeachment, then the members of the United States Senate are going to serve as a jury. So would it even be proper for them to discuss it?
The question has arisen in a lot of senators' minds. I'm sure I talked to Senator Weicker about it, for example, specifically, and he says, I have refused to comment on either resignation or impeachment on the grounds that I may be a juror in this case, and I would disqualify myself if I expressed an opinion beforehand. A lot of senators have said the same thing. You know, if you ask them, they say, we won't talk about that. We are potential jurors. Now they are being invited to the White House as potential jurors, and one might ask, will they not be disqualifying themselves by going down? The president could say, if it ever should come to the Senate, this fellow's disqualified, that fellow's disqualified, and you wouldn't even have a quorum, you know, to really try the president. It's a curious business. I don't know the legality of it, whether there's influencing of the jury involved here or not. But in political terms, it's a fascinating question.
Well, you know, I had gotten the impression, obviously a mistaken one, that these meetings that the president had set up were for the specific purpose of his responding to specific questions about Watergate. Now, where did I get that impression?
That's the impression the White House let go out. Now, So far, that has not happened. This is not to say it may not begin to happen, but as of the first 2 meetings that we know about, there were just no questions asked about Watergate at all. Now, they may come down and say, look, we want to talk about Watergate, and nothing but Watergate, which is what the White House indicated they were down there to do.
Jim? We want to come back to this in a second, but Jim, you were downtown today. You covered the guilty plea by Gulf Oil on this campaign contribution, illegal contribution, and you also have been following the Watergate Committee very closely in this whole area. Specifically to the question that was brought up by the witnesses today from the American Shipbuilding Company, I think Mr. Steinbrenner was quoted as saying that this kind of thing is done all the time by American corporations. The obvious question is this in fact true, or is there something unique about this 1972 election?
I think that the excuse that all corporations do this all the time is a rationalization for those that are now faced with court proceedings. Only a small minority raise money illegally, as 5 corporations have pleaded guilty to doing so. Those corporations have a history of having done it not only in the 1972 election, but in previous ones. Braniff Airways, for instance, in its appearance in court yesterday in Washington to plead guilty, admitted through its lawyer that it had a lengthy history of the use of corporate funds for political purposes. I think the practice has arisen because the Justice Department, until Watergate, was very lax about any prosecution of corporations for this violation. It was another one of those laws that was winked at in the political practice.
Yes, but these corporations that we're dealing with, American Shipbuilding, Gulf Oil, Ashland Oil, Braniff, American Airlines, these are, among the top companies of the United States. And you're saying that they've always done this?
No, I'm saying that they have, the corporations that have come forward now seem to have a bit of a pattern which preceded the 1972 election. The American Shipbuilding testimony showed that its bonus plan was set up in 1970, was active in 2 previous years before this one.
But Jim, isn't it likely that a lot of other companies have been guilty of the same practices? These are the ones that they brought.
I would suggest it's still a minority of American businesses. There are many legal ways in which a business can give money which is identified with that firm for political purposes, but doesn't violate the prohibition on the use of corporate money.
How do they do that?
Look, General Dynamics, which is a large defense contractor, nuclear submarines, aerospace, gave approximately $100,000 for the president in 1972, in April, by encouraging its employees to donate 1% of their annual salary, suggesting this as a target figure, but allowing each one to do so voluntarily. No compulsion, no requirement, no use of company money.
Not a check-off system where they took...
Not in this case. Each employee who wished to participate, and the employees of that defense contractor are rather politically sophisticated. They chose to. They realized the importance of doing so, did so voluntarily.
That's perfectly legitimate.
It's much more common to do it this way or through a legal checkoff plan where the employee, again, voluntarily commits his money to a political awareness fund, Committee for Good Government.
These political awareness funds for a lot of companies, the money is set aside, is it not, Jim, say for political contributions, and then by a vote or some kind of...
the trustees
decide who gets it.
Whose board usually parallels top management more than the employee down at the bottom. Yes, but that is legal for both labor unions and corporations, as long as the employee uses his personal money and does so voluntarily.
All right, back to the not-so-legal techniques. I was fascinated just by the sheer procedure that American Shipbuilding came up, the bonus bit. What are some of the other procedures, techniques, let's call it, have been used?
We're going to move in the next 2 days of the Watergate hearings, I think, into more foreign laundering of money. It was the Mexican money, the $100,000 from Houston to Mexico City, in the first week after Watergate that provided the link to the committee to re-elect the president and started many of Nixon's present Watergate troubles. We're going to, I think, hear testimony within the next 2 days on American Airlines' use of a conduit in Lebanon to raise its $55,000 that went to President Nixon illegally in 1972. When Ashland Oil pleaded guilty today in Kentucky, a few hours after the Gulf case, the $100,000 they gave for the president came from the books of a subsidiary in Gabon, on the west coast of Africa, where they're drilling for oil, offshore oil. The money came out of a foreign bank account. 3M has already pleaded guilty to an illegal contribution of $30,000, and that money, according to various Senate investigators, was raised by sending fees to a consultant in Europe, who then returned the cash to go into 3M's political kitty.
I was fascinated by the wire story on the Braniff plea yesterday, and the attorney for Braniff was asked, I believe, by the judge, how did you guys handle this thing on the company books? And he said, oh, it's so complicated, it'd take 25 minutes to explain. I don't think you want me to go into it, and the judge agreed. But do you happen to know how they handled it, how Braniff handled it?
Braniff didn't explain. They said they did not write it off for taxes as a legitimate business expense, which would have been another violation of tax laws. But in the American shipbuilding case, according to testimony today, the money was charged off as part of a claim on, as a matter of fact, on a government contract. When the testimony didn't show this, but when American Shipbuilding gave its $100,000, $75,000 personally from the chairman, $25,000 from the 8 employees involved, at the time they gave that money in 1972, the company was seeking payment of $5 million on an overrun on a research vessel named the OSS Researcher, built for the Oceanographic Survey under the Department of Commerce. The bonuses that went to the employees were carried on the books as part of the researcher expense claims.
Mm-hmm. Which, of course, leads to the next obvious area, Jim. Either unstated or stated, the implication has been, through all of these political contribution matters, that this is not being done, these contributions were not made just out of the goodness of somebody's heart, that they did expect something in return. Now, you've looked at all of these, and you followed this thing very closely. As I said earlier, this is your #1 game right now. How effective were these people at buying things for their money in 1972?
The only quid pro quo that's been demonstrated so far was the milk, the increase in milk price supports after the dairymen's industry commitment of $2 million in early 1971. 500,000 of which was actually delivered. In most cases, there has been no demonstrable quid pro quo for the money.
But American Shipbuilding, for instance, did not get their thing reversed, right?
They did not. They eventually had to pay $230,000 for late delivery of the ship in question.
You did a majors. Go ahead, Peter.
I just want, but they do buy the status quo, don't they?
Yes, they do.
Nobody's going to, take away their subsidies or take away other little goodies that they already get, as long as they contribute to the winning side.
Many businesses have what they might consider a satisfactory balance, a living level with the government that they only want to maintain.
What about this? You did a major story that became a major national story last week, I believe, on the contributions of the American trucking industry. Now, if these people have been subpoenaed yet, I don't know about it. I'm not sure they're going to testify before the Watergate
They have been
Committee.
interviewed by both the Senate investigators and the prosecutor's office.
Right. What was involved there?
In this case, a number of firms whose executives are members of the American Trucking Associations packaged their money. All of the money was given legally, voluntarily, by the executives. It was all reported duly on the books of the Nixon campaign. But instead of each individual sending his check to Washington, the trucking industry chose the far more effective method of giving all of its checks to one man, John Ruan of Des Moines, who was the secretary of ATA, and Ruan delivered between $600,000 and $700,000 to the Nixon campaign in Washington.
It made a big clunk when it was delivered.
Yes.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And the trucking industry immediately would receive the political credit for a large contribution on behalf of all of its members. The going level at that time, the suggested figure, admittedly, was $25,000 for each large firm's executives.
But nothing wrong with that.
Nothing wrong. Nothing.
Was there any quid pro quo?
There was a case pending that would have changed the Interstate Commerce Commission's regulation of the trucking industry that would have allowed more price competition and actually more trucking competition. It never got out of the House in 1972. But again, this is the maintenance of the status quo, not the quid pro quo. There is no evidence. There's no evidence that the outcome of that was at all related to the trucking contributions although the regulatory question was discussed at the industry's fundraising meetings when the various executives anteed up that $600,000.
All right, Peter, the 7 senators who are hearing this testimony on campaign contributions very much want to go down and listen to Mr. Nixon and cross-examine him, as you've said earlier. What do you think the chances are that the President will, in fact, agree to sit down with the Watergate Committee?
Well, they say they've made no decision on it, Jim. The White House spokesman has said that, and that it's still an open matter. Conceivably, he might do it, but as Jim pointed out, it's not sworn testimony, and once you get into the White House, the aura of that place tends to defang people. You know, they're very polite. It's the President, and the presidency kind of awes them. And I don't think it's quite the same. He may calculate on this a little later. He may see how it goes with all these other groups of congressmen that he's having in, and may figure, well, that's no terror for me. I'll just take them on, you see, and bring them on down here. It's not an improbable development. I wouldn't rule it out at all because they don't rule it out. I would just simply ask about the White House. Yeah, I would just simply raise a question about its effectiveness.
Look, let me say something rather critical of the members of the Senate committee. They are not effective at all at questioning without having a little crib sheet in front of them prepared by the staff on the results of the advance interviews with the witnesses, where the witnesses have spelled out for the staff investigators everything they're going to say under oath. When confronted by a hostile witness, the committee has not been effective. When confronted by an evasive one,
my goodness, I would think they could come up with some questions to ask.
Well, they'd almost have to come up with a counsel. And moreover, there was one point I'd like to draw back a little bit. If the President were to agree to do this, Jim, he finally crosses the Rubicon on executive privilege and separation of powers. Now he sits down with the Senate committee, even though it's at the White House. And that raises question about this precedent he has wanted to preserve, that you don't cross those lines. He will have crossed it almost altogether then. That may be in his mind.
Overall then, though, Peter, from his standpoint, the public relations campaign, as you call it, is working pretty well thus far.
It would seem to be, but one has to suspend disbelief to go with this fantasy until we know that the actual questions are being asked.
All right, gentlemen, thank you very much. The Senate Watergate Committee will be back tomorrow to hear more stories about corporate campaign contributions, and we'll be back with a complete replay tomorrow night. Please check with your local public television station for the exact time of the broadcast in your area. For our guest tonight, for Impact and Peter Carey, I'm Jim Lara. Thank you and good night.
Impact has brought you Washington, November 13th. Tonight, videotape coverage of today's hearings by the Senate Select Committee on Presidential Campaign Activities. This program was made possible by grants from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and the Ford Foundation. Washington, November 13th has been a production of NPAC, the division of the Greater Washington Educational Telecommunications Association.